the largest protest we've seen since the beginning of the war, both in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv last night. And then, as you said, there's a general strike this morning. So this could be the moment where the protests go up a stage.
How should Israel respond to the death of 6 more of their hostages in Gaza? The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it shows the need to keep fighting Hamas, but the hostages' families, opposition parties and unions disagree. They want a ceasefire immediately. Protesters gathered outside Netanyahu's office in Jerusalem last night. The scale of the protest is remarkable. People gathered entirely covering a flyover in 4 directions on a large motorway. Well, there could be a general strike starting today. Let's speak to the Economist correspondent Anshel Pfeffer. Good morning to you, Anshel.
Good morning, Asma.
We have heard this before, of course, relatives saying we must have a ceasefire because the priority is to get the hostages back. And I wonder whether what happened over the weekend, because, it seems like they were killed as they were about potentially to be rescued. And they managed to stay alive for 11 months. Do you think that makes it different this time around because there is a specific, very heart-wrenching case?
Yes, I think that this could well be a pivotal moment for many Israelis, and we're seeing now in the polls that a majority of Israelis want a deal where with a ceasefire, perhaps not a long-term ceasefire, but certainly a temporary truce allows for the release of the hostages. And we also saw, as you mentioned, the largest protest we've seen since the beginning of the war, both in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv last night. And then, as you said, there's a general strike this morning. So this could be the moment where the protests go up a stage and start creating some serious pressure on the government.
So just to clarify then, there is definitely a general strike. How long is that going to go on for?
Well, right now it's a general strike for today. Not all the unions have joined in. So you could say it's a partial general strike. But once again, this is the first time that the main trade union federation is calling for a strike since the beginning of the war. And having a general strike at time of war isn't a simple thing. Obviously, many people feel that at wartime, perhaps this isn't the right step to take. And the fact that the trade unions have called for this strike, I think, is a major development. But it really all depends on how long this lasts. If last night's protest and if today's strike are a one-off, I think the government will be able to shrug it off. If this is something which will persist, will continue, there'll be more strikes, there'll be more big protests, and it's hard to see how the government can ignore this.
What has been Netanyahu's answer to previous calls from hostages' families to have a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire? Has he argued that there's no guarantee that a temporary ceasefire means that any or all of the civilian hostages would be released?
Well, for a start, he's claiming that it's not Israel, not his government, which doesn't want a ceasefire, doesn't want an agreement. It's Hamas, and with some justification, especially since it was Hamas which murdered the hostages at some point a few days ago. He's saying if as long as Hamas won't agree to a deal, then Israel can't agree either. But there is some also a level of disingenuity to that, because we saw on Thursday night how his cabinet voted against the opinion of the defense minister to reject any deal which had Israel leaving even temporarily the Philadelphia corridor. And that's the border area between Gaza and Egypt, which is currently held by Israel. That's the area which Hamas smuggled arms through before October 7. And even though the security establishment in Israel is saying that there can be a temporary withdrawal from the corridor in order to enable the hostage release and some kind of agreement, most of Netanyahu's cabinet and Netanyahu himself are adamantly opposed to that. And that's really where we're seeing now the main bone of contention, both between Israel's security establishment, which wants this kind of a truce or a ceasefire and believes it's the only way to get some of the hostages out alive, and Netanyahu's hardline cabinet, who are adamantly opposed to any real pause in the war. Netanyahu, his position seems to be right now with the far right, even though he, at least in talks with the Americans, he said he is in favor of a deal. So what we're seeing now, at least many Israelis believe, is Netanyahu being politically pressured and taking the position of the far right in order to survive in office.
And what about? I mean, running throughout all of this, of course, is the argument that is held by some people that it is in Netanyahu's interests to keep the current situation continuing because of the kind of questions that he has to answer himself. Is that something that is said out loud?
Oh, it's very much out there. The question of whether there will be or when there will be a national commission of inquiry. There's been calls for such a commission basically since October 7th, since the failure that led to Hamas, or that led to Israel being caught by surprise by the Hamas attack on October 7th and everything that led up to that, and also the conduct of the government in the past 11 months. So there certainly has been a lot of calls for that. Netanyahu's been withstanding those calls. And it's easier for him to say, well, we'll have a commission of inquiry later when the war is over, when the war is still taking place. So it certainly is in his political interest to keep the war going at least at some kind of tempo, even though right now the level of fighting in Gaza is nowhere near what it was a few months ago. We're talking here about rather limited Israeli operations right now in Gaza. But for Netanyahu's perspective, whether it's avoiding a commission of inquiry, which he probably won't come out very well from, or keeping his coalition intact, it makes political sense to keep the war going.
Okay. Anshel, thank you for talking to us. That's the economist correspondent Anshel Pfeffer.